The following video has been created without the use of AI. Please support your human content creators by liking the video and commenting something down below. Subscribing is optional. Now please, enjoy the show.
Rap, tap, tap. Rap, tap, tap. An unseen force moved through the cold, uncaring hallways of the urban shade black site. Rap, tap, tap. Went the noise of a creature as its naked feet tapped over the floors, walls, and ceilings, leaving behind muddy footprints. Empty black eyes staring down into the darkness. From somewhere a creature approached. The squirrel had been attracted by a little light, floating just over his reach, slowly, unthreateningly, and yet just quick enough to avert the monster's tentacles. Rap, tap, tap. The squirrel stopped. The light attractive, but the sound more threatening. The monster turned its head, flickering a scary visage on its face, and yet, the squirrel wasn't met by something that was intimidated by it. A slender, tall figure with black, shiny eyes reflecting the squirrel's scare tactic back at it. The darkness didn't seem so soothing anymore as it hit the features of the new arrival. And that's when the little light moved around the squirrel's head and floated towards the figure. Starting low. The creature the squirrel was met with was a placental mammal. I could tell by the clearly visible navel. Humanoid, clearly. As the light slowly floated upwards. Too tall to be human, with sickly, bumpy green skin. It floated higher. Obviously female. And the light stopped next to the intruder's face. The squirrel took its equivalent of a step backwards to indicate its desire to flee. The creature's lips quivered. Something was moving just beneath the grotesque visage. And then, as quickly as a blink of an eye, something long and black shot out of the predator's mouth. Its tongue, long and barbed. Like a bullet, it shot through the squirrel's squishy skin, destroying its brain in a singular strike, killing it. Tongue still buried in its head, the predator stepped forward, lowering its posture to crawl quickly forward, to feed on its flesh. Long, dangerous claws tore at the squirrel's rubbery skin, removing thick, raw chunks as it fed. The little light, like an eternal companion, hovered over the creature's body like a guardian angel. Sebastian closed the door quietly, before taking notes. He had watched you hunt for a few days now. The document of yours was not fully filled out yet, as you had been a very recent addition to the black side. You were given the designation J509-2, with that little knight being J509-1. Codename Swamp Hag. Well, you weren't really a hag in the regular sense. If anything, you had parts about you that were considered conventionally attractive. If you weren't towering over regular people, that is. And your skin wasn't green with black splotches like that of a toad. And, your eyes were just two big black orbs, making it impossible to tell where you were looking at any point. Your arms were also quite long, and your claws sharp enough to rip apart a squirrel. as well as strong enough to kill a wall dweller. You seem to be primarily interested in meat, and you didn't seem to care from where it came from, hunting humans, monsters, and animals alike. But that light of yours was what was so interesting about you. And also, one of the few things actually analyzed by Urban Shade. Apparently the light wasn't real, but more like a collective hallucination, as the light didn't appear on photographs or film. It actually didn't illuminate anything at all. It was unknown how you were able to create the light, unknown how you could control it. But it was what you used to hunt. The light was capable to attract travelers as well as animals in the wild. For food, of course. You, J509-2, had been discovered in a run-down wooden shack, the slowly disintegrating wood and state indicating that it had been built at around the mid to late 1800s in the famous Louisiana Bayou. Sebastian finished taking notes for the day. He needed to make sure if any of those dumb expendables ended up in the same room as you, they would know how to deal with you the next time. Something that was of substance. He needed to know how to defeat you. Instead of just, don't follow the very obviously and dangerous wisp. Though perhaps his eyes narrowed. He had a thought. Call it a curiosity as he reread his own notes. He had an idea that perhaps seeing the wisp already made it so that it was already too late. And so he created a hypothesis. Quietly, he pushed the pencil into the rings of the notepad before returning it to his bag. And curiously, he pressed the open button of the door. After putting his glowing antenna into his mouth to prevent any attention he might be getting from you. The little wisp was still floating over your feeding, crouched form. Maybe the wisp had a mimetic effect, making anyone who sees it infatuated with it. Making potential prey lower their guard. After all, the squirrel only reacted once it was clear that it was basically too late. Sebastian's own tongue rubbed over his antenna in anticipation as he stared towards you. You had your hand placed against your mouth as you slurped the inky black blood of the squirrel, while your eyes stared right at the wisp. As far as your animal brain was concerned, you didn't understand why you were made sleepy and brought into this place, but there were tasty things here everywhere, and there was a primeval hunger deep within you that demanded to be satisfied. You dove into the squirrel's torn upper half, its cool, slightly lukewarm blood covering your arms as you chewed into its flesh. Meat and blood, no bone, just muscle and juices. You had been eating solely on these creatures since the black side turned into a slaughterhouse. The convenience of just diving into gore and meat, no bone, nothing too hard to bite aside from the squirrel's eating apparatus, which could be safely discarded. But the gnashing of your teeth was interrupted by a noise. Your ears twitched, and your head and body turned into the same motion. Still on all fours, you snarled towards the new intruder, your claws placed on the squirrel's carcass as if you tried to protect it. Staring up at Sebastian, and annoyed he grabbed his antenna, pulling it out of his mouth. He had accidentally thrown over a cup while getting closer to you. The antenna glowed strong and illuminated the room in a foreboding orange. This room used to be a simple quarantine checkpoint. Scattered papers, decorative synthetic plants, and glass shards were scattered about everywhere. The little wisp flied circles around your head. You weren't about to give up your food, it seemed. But Sebastian's lack of a real fear response was, to him, proof for his theory. So right now, the feeling he had was similar to that of a pet owner being snarled at by their cat. The wisp, whatever it was, or however you controlled it, must do this. Were you aware of it, though? Sebastian had observed you for a while, and so, with a stone-cold expression, he reached into his bag, and before you could pounce him, he threw a slab of ham at you. Well, not at you, but he was aiming for the ground, next to you. He had found the meat in one of the cafeterias with a still-functioning fridge. Well, yes, you were eating squiddles for convenience. It was practically impossible for you to resist a perfectly cooked and seasoned feast of meat. So while you were still pouncing, you instead pounced the little piece of meat. Tearing into it. It was delicious. You even chewed on your fingers as they were covered in delicious ham residue, eyes seeming to shine almost. As they stared at Sebastian, who was about to leave the room. He smirked. But as he turned to type in the door code to close the door, his eyes were met with the empty room. Rap, tap, tap. Your footsteps could be heard quickly approaching him, and he just barely managed to close the door. He heard your head slam against the metal. The fact that you had a natural cloaking ability was making keeping track of you quite difficult. He repeated his process of feeding you whenever he found you. Sebastian had realized that especially meat covered in barbecue sauce was attracting to you. And Sebastian quickly realized that meat covered in barbecue sauce was especially attractive to you, as you often spent over an hour licking all over your entire body just to pick up every little morsel of the taste. And it all started as he was making sketches of your feeding behavior while you were gulping down on meat chunks when your head suddenly pushed against his drawing hand. Something akin to a pout was on your face, your chin placed on his notepad. He couldn't tell what you were looking at, but your vision was focused on his hand. Sebastian's right eye twitched. He was the type of person who valued personal spaces, and his... you just invaded. Without his consent, no less. But after seeing what you had done to that hole dweller, he didn't dare to upset you. After all, by now he had also gotten 7 expendables. And so instead, his third arm, the one that wasn't holding the notepad or a pencil, he placed on your head. His claws digging into your scalp as they ruffled through your hair. Wait a moment, he thought, as he gave you scratches. I might have domesticated you, haven't I? You rolled on your back, as if to confirm what he said, staring up at him. The wisp seductively floated around the rims of your chest. Sebastian's eyes narrowed as he smirked. Hand moving down from your head to your cheek, his claw gently brushing over your skin. It felt different to that of humans. It was a little bumpy and rough, but thanks to a very thin layer of oil that your skin naturally produced, it was rather sleek, soft and tender even. How could something that felt so wonderful against his hand be part of this monstrous, deadly being? But then again, the wisp flew circles around your chest, seems as if it indicated where he should go next. Sebastian didn't think he'd ever do this, but he allowed himself to drown in the pleasure you were offering him. After all, you were probably human enough. And the fact that you towered over regular humans came in handy with him. After all, for him, you were fun-sized. Purring in a way that previously had helped you relax, he began opening his jacket, revealing scales shaped like muscles. Not that he wasn't strong. After all, a few days ago, you had attacked him, and he had grabbed you by the hair and thrown you around like a rag doll, making your face very familiar with the metal floor. Sebastian flashed his teeth as he grinned, before slowly raising his tail. If he was gonna do this, he was gonna do this as your superior, as your alpha. Your hand slapped against his elongated appendage as he began wrapping himself around you, constricting you. You felt his entire weight on you, around you, made easier by your oily skin. It was an amazing feeling that was now pressed against the scales of his tail, rubbing sleek and seductive. Meanwhile, you were barely allowed to breathe. His weight on your thorax made it difficult to get enough air into your lungs. His squeezing and releasing of you, it felt like you were chewed, devoured, and spit out again. His rubbing and squeezing, massaging, was a lot on your brain. You wiggled and writhed in pleasure. It was as if he was doing the breathing for you, relaxing and squeezing in a breath-like rhythm. You gagged, pleased. Your long black tongue lolling out of your mouth. With its barbs retracted, it almost looked like a normal but very long tongue with a bulbous growth at its tip. Should you risk it? Screw it. Sebastian lowered his upper body while continuing his ministrations and squeezes. He first gently nipped at your shoulder, licking and biting his way to your face, leaving behind tiny holes through which blood just barely escaped from. And when his head hovered above yours, he tightly grabbed your tongue with his hand. You gasped in pleasure and pain. The thing was sticky and slimy at the same time, leaving behind a thick coat of black-colored salvia on his hand, but he didn't care anymore. His lips pressed onto your lipless maw. It was difficult finding a moment of peace in the halls of the post-containment breach black site, but he was glad that he found one of these moments with you right now. Of course, Sebastian took full advantage of your resistant body. Your size, muscles, and bones were strong enough that he could be rough with you. But it was the little wisp that irritated him. You fluttered around him in a wave motion. Growling, Sebastian pulled up from you. You followed him with your gaze, as he pushed a finger against his thumb and then flicked the wisp. And even though the thing was a shared hallucination, it still reacted to his touch. It shot upwards, slapped against the ceiling, and then silently exploded into bright colors, like a New Year's Eve firework. Sebastian watched the spark slowly fade away. Of course, the wisp was unharmed. It still floated there as the center of where the explosion had happened. Sebastian burst into laughter. He had kept count of the days since he saw the sky last. And if he was right, no, he knew he was right. After all, he was quite smart. It should be the end of the year right now. Of course. You were just slightly more intelligent than an animal, so you didn't understand what his reaction was about. Was it threatening? Was it positive? And for a moment, you thought, perhaps, deadly, as his body squeezed you tightly. than it ever did before. But then he pounced up, took your wisp and smashed it on the ground, creating another colorful explosion. Grabbing after lights vanished, he threw it against the wall, and in the same motion, he kissed you again, passionately, his tongue pushing into your mouth as the wisp exploded for a third time.
Hey, you watched the video until the very end. That's very kind of you. But before I say goodbye, I have to shout out all of my lovely channel members, especially my high-ranking darling stewards, who get a members-only video every month. Join the tier for just $4.99. Anyways, we have Nicolai Hatcher, Maxi Cat, Alison Watkins, Bella Mare, Mystic Jade 111, Giovanna Moretti, Twilight Mia, Angry Boxman, Hella, Anonymous Weep, and Nicodemus D. Thank you for supporting me. Also, thank you to everybody else who is supporting me. You are keeping me alive.